In fact, we make very thin margins on our first deal. Where we make a lot of money is later in time, 10 years from now, we have this giant recurring revenue stream that costs us nothing to produce. Then we'll have the 48% operating margins. So I think very early in SaaS, there's a number of things. And I think, generally speaking, it's harder to start a software as a service company for some of the economic reasons, right? For an SAP implementation, you pay them $1 million on day one. They hand you a disk and they say goodbye. And then you spend $3 million on the Deloitte guys to maybe make it work. I hope you're not from Deloitte. And then, 2 years later, it all works. With NetSuite, it doesn't work that way. If it's $1 million deal, you pay me $100,000 on year one, and I have the same amount of work. So there's more cost up front. So I had to build a business model to address that far lower margin existence early in my life. And so now we are profitable. Salesforce is profitable. You're starting to see some of those things. But this lower margin, and this is why I think technology always moves from the bottom up, because companies that start at that lower price point have to build their business around a lower margin, easier to use model. And you can always move up to higher functionality on ease of use and higher margin. You can never move down from high margin complexity down market. And no technology has ever moved down market. So I think it's a huge competitive advantage that we have some of these. Obviously, it's hard, it's painful to go that route. But when you look at us 10 years from now, we're going to look like an Oracle or an SAP. They're maintenance streams, because year 2 of my relationship with the customer is 85% profit. Year 1, I might break even. But the other guys who I'm competing against, that's the antithesis of their business model. They have to make 50 points day 1. I'm going to kill them every time. My business model is much more convenient.
Do you end up, as looking at this, one of the things that we're talking about is that, and this gets into what you're just talking about, is that if you are a super convenient sort of player, and you're basically got a big market at very low margins, and the pressure on you is going to be, as somebody who runs a company, to increase the margins and essentially climb up that fidelity thing. Mm-hmm. Right. At what point is it a mistake to keep going up market? Up market, up in fidelity, because it's actually not your brand. It's not what it's not what you do. It's starting to create a whole different kind of product than what you're actually started out doing.
Yeah, it's a good question, and we do struggle with it a bit, and I think you look at it from a business model standpoint. It's quite frankly as hard to sell a $100,000 transaction as it is to sell a $10,000 transaction, right? And it's hard to implement both of those. So at some point you have to look at the marketplace and say, where is the sweet spot for the complexity of what we do and the complexity of the problem we solve? The way that we've done it, in terms of determining how we move up our market, I shouldn't really say this on camera, but we kind of call them accidental verticals. People that came to us for either fidelity or convenience reasons in droves, right? So we've seen natural verticals in the NetSuite customer base. Wholesale distribution is a natural vertical for us. There's a lot I could go into the reasons why, but it is. Services companies are a second natural vertical. They come to us. And high-tech companies come to us in droves. So what we've done, and it's, again, this notion of an accidental vertical, is we listen to customer input, we add more features and functions for those 3 types of companies, and we move up market because we add those features and functions. We can address the needs of larger and larger companies. Mm-hmm. So the accidental vertical concept, combined with then listening to customers and adding the features they need to run their business more efficiently, drags us up market in the right way, I think. Mm-hmm. We don't go out and say, financial services isn't a huge NetSuite vertical, so we don't, even though an MBA would say that's the market, or would have said it 3 years ago, that's the market to go after, they have all the money. We never went after it because they didn't come to us for our product was neither convenient nor high fidelity
for them. Yeah.
Right.
Okay. You got any others out there? You got one here.
This question for Kevin. I'm just kind of interested in your summary of the book in terms of why things work and when things don't work. Can you give us few tips? I still plan to buy your book, by the way, but I'm just kind of interested in kind of synopsis as to especially why things don't work.
Right. So just to tell you a little bit of the story behind that was that I went to the Web 2.0 conference in San Francisco here in 2005, and Reed Hastings was on stage at the time, the CEO of Netflix, and he started talking about how he made his business decisions based on this trade that people were willing to make between the quality of an experience and how easy it was to get. And for some reason, when he said that, this whole series of conversations that I had with Trip, with Zach, with Mark Andreessen, with Steve Jobs back when he was at Next, a whole series of conversations started sort of like ringing in my head as like they were all talking about kind of the same thing, and I went back and sort of started to put it together, and created this model where that ended up showing that if you plot company after company, product after product on it, the things that tend to actually do really well in the marketplace tend to be fairly disciplined about either being the high fidelity end of things, which is something very rich experience, oftentimes pricey, oftentimes an exclusive kind of product, or things that end up being extreme on the convenience side of things. Very, very easy to use, very mass market, usually low priced, simple to get, and stuff that falls somewhere in the middle and are not quite either, tend to inspire consumer apathy. And an easy example of all that is in the music industry, where right now and for the last 10 years or so, the two ends of things that have done really well have been concerts by huge acts like U2. They sell out all the time, extremely high fidelity. You go and you get the experience of going and seeing the band. You also get the sort of this identity factor of being able to talk about it with your friends. And yet at the same time, extremely inconvenient. I mean, you have to go, you have to park, you have to pay a lot of money, you have to listen to Bono talk about some African hunger problem or something like that. And yet it sells out. It does really, really well. The other end of what's happened in the music industry that's done really well is iPods, iTunes, MP3 songs. Even though those are extremely low fidelity, it's like the actual quality of the sound is like 10 times worse than just on a compact disc, but you're willing to do it, give up that fidelity because it's so convenient. It costs a fair amount of money, or fair being like not much, and it's easy to use, and you can carry 10,000 songs in your pocket. And the one thing that ends up falling in the middle in that sort of space in between is the compact disc, and people have increasingly grown apathetic about the compact disc. It's not quite enough fidelity to make you want to do that. It's not quite convenient enough. It just kind of is, in the middle. So in industry after industry, product after product, if you plot things out and you look at that, it tends to show that the things at either extreme that are disciplined about being there tend to do the best and inspire the most, consumer excitement. The things that fall in the middle don't. Now, to go to something that Zach was alluding to, I kept wondering about this top right corner. Why can't you be, wouldn't the best products or services be both super high fidelity and super convenient? Isn't that where you'd want to be? And so I kept researching this and talking to people and trying to plot things out and looking at it, trying to understand it. And it started to figure it out. And an easy example of what ends up happening in that particular spot is Starbucks. And if you look what Starbucks started out as a super high fidelity product. Everybody, it was a specialty coffee shop. Howard Schultz bought into it because he loves what, not only just the richness of the coffee, but the experience of going to a Starbucks and, paying lots of money for a cup of coffee and, walk around with this little green symbol in your hand, and people thought, you were kind of cool, and and the whole thing of going and standing there and ordering a double half-calf macchiato with whatever else, became part of your, your identity. And so Starbucks was this high fidelity product, and it increasingly started to be driven towards convenience. And after Howard Schultz stepped down as CEO, the next generation of CEO just jammed in that direction towards trying to make Starbucks ubiquitous, highly convenient everywhere. I mean, the classic Onion headline in the Onion was "New Starbucks opens in the bathroom of an old Starbucks." I mean, that's what was going on. And so Starbucks drove there, and it briefly got to this place at high fidelity and high convenience, and then the wheel started to come off. It all started to disintegrate because the tension between those two things, if you start to sort of think about it just naturally, the tension between those two things is strong, because if you're trying to create a high fidelity, cool, exclusive kind of product, and yet everybody on Earth is using it and doing it, and it's so the coolness factor disappears, and start to be lines at Starbucks, so it's not convenient anymore, and you start thinking, if what I really want is a quick cup of coffee, well, I'm just going to go to 7-Eleven. If you're trying to build something that's really convenient, and you want it to also be fidelity, well, it's probably too high priced, or it's so if you want, it's eating in the opposite direction. And so if you can briefly get there, but it starts to disintegrate, and indeed in mid-2007, Starbucks same-store sales started to fall off. The stock price took a dive. Howard Schultz came back, took over the company, and ever since, everything he's talked about is reclaiming Starbucks as fidelity. And so this seems to be happening. You can find examples of that in a number of different industries and a number of different kinds of companies. So that's the 2-minute overview. You're welcome.
There is some. There is something which is looks like something new and cool. All these recommendation engines that we are using, they are based on past experience, what you have done, browsed, bought, and so forth. There is a game changer coming. Suppose that you are shopping around in a store, and you get to a PDA, a recommendation that you should buy this product or not buy this product because it does fit your genome or it doesn't fit your genome. So it's based not on what you have done before, but what you are. Think about it.
So getting product recommendations based on your DNA.
Exactly.
Aha. I don't know. What do you guys think about that?
Sounds pretty cool. I don't think I want to know that much about myself.
I think there's some very interesting privacy issues there going. Anyone else? Yes, sir.
Trip, what is the future of the console game makers, and are we going to start seeing them move into social gaming, selling virtual goods, free-to-play model, etc.?
Yeah, I think the game industry is undergoing a tremendous change, and there are a lot of companies going with the flow on these new changes. I think Apple and Nintendo in the last 5 years have probably been the most innovative big companies I've ever seen in my life. And Nintendo kind of repotted themselves, and the more established companies in the console business, starting with Sony, since Sony got kind of they got kind of bushwhacked on what happened with the PlayStation 3, they've really got to make this shift. But of course, as is often the case, the bigger companies have a harder time. They have to go through stages of denial. They have more to lose in terms of starting to disconnect themselves from a belief in what the traditional market used to do. And I think one of the reasons why I have the separation is that there's just feature creep. So the person who's looking for the highest level experience, they're going to start, even if they're not already there, they'll start asking for more features, and that just can go on for so long that you just end up with this gulf separating the people that are really interested in that, really capable of that, and everybody else. Particularly if it's a technology-driven field. And just most people just can't handle that much of it. I mean, I'm thinking about environments like Second Life, where it's almost like there's this subset of people in Second Life that are really industrialists, and they know how to use all the tools in Second Life to build things, and then everybody else wants to just be a consumer. It's almost like that kind of a divide. So in the game industry, you got your hardcore gamers. They don't represent a very high percentage of the world's population, but now you have everybody else is comfortable getting involved in games if it's a means to an end. I mean, the hardcore gamer just wanted to play a game. Whereas everybody, they want to use the game as a way of starting a conversation and being in contact with people. That's a much bigger idea.
Yes, Al? Yeah. Oh, I'm sorry. I'm supposed to let the microphone people run up.
Yeah. So Alpha.
Yeah. Wait. There you go.
Alpha with Microsoft, and of course, clearly, I like to believe that we have both high fidelity as well as convenient products.
That's a problem. I mean,
you got to read this book. Read the book.
To Zach's point, I was just wondering about that maybe I should skip a chapter. And I am hosting a Tupperware party too.
Windows 7 party at Alpha's house. Let's go.
That's right. But, I find this conversation really interesting, and I was racking my brain because to kind of go back to my psychology class during my undergrad years, and the notion of satisficing, the satisficing with a C, the notion of good enough. And it kind of like this conversation sort of reminds me of that. And I'm starting to think about use situations. So when do you pick convenience? When do you pick quality, as it relates to software development? And obviously, web-based software is the perfect example of people, choosing convenience over quality. But it would be great if you guys could, comment on that. Like, do you worry about convenience and quality when you're choosing a mate, or I'm just joking. But
That's a whole new book. In fact, that's going to be a book collection.
situations as it relates to technology, that would be great.
The last part of it just totally threw me off. I think you can choose a mate for convenience and quality, though. I don't think you haven't covered that in your book, but I think that's okay. I think all software is going to be delivered conveniently. I mean, I don't think there's, at least in my mind, there's no doubt that everybody's going to deliver software over the internet, right? And more software is going to be delivered that way. So I think the convenience factor is going to be table stakes to actually be in the software business. So that is a differentiator for companies like NetSuite, and so it's all going to go away. So I think at the end of the day, the fidelity argument is going to be the big argument in software. And again, it depends on what kind of software you're making, what the fidelity issues are. A game is very different than an ERP application, and the person using the ERP application has different expectations and those kinds of things. But I think it's going to come down largely to fidelity.
Yeah, I think this tension is always going to be with us. Part of the whole argument around convenience is you want technologies to get smaller. They get smaller, or they go wireless. Now you have memory constraints and processing constraints and battery constraints and bandwidth constraints. And just an example from the iPhone: if you download an app on the iPhone, if it's more than 10 megabytes in size, AT&T won't let you use their network. So a friend will tell you, "Oh, you got to check this out." Okay, great. Boom, I'm going to try it. I can't do it, and then it slips your mind. You never remember to do it later. It's a fairly big difference. I've already seen applications on the iPhone that are hundreds of megabytes in size. They're not convenient on the iPhone. You could increase the memory capacity and the network speed by an order of magnitude, and somebody would make things that are just 10 times bigger than what's already there. So I think the software is always going to get bigger in relationship to network speed and compute power and memory. You're just always going to have this tension.
Yeah. One of the things about talking about this too that you have to keep in mind is that that trade-off and what's fidelity or what's convenience or whatever is different for different people or different groups of people, and it's not just one thing that works for everybody. And so, like a simple thing in gaming would be if you're talking to, and it actually helps you decide. I think it could actually help you decide who it is that you market to. So if you in gaming, the kinds of people who are really into gaming and really hardcore gamers, they're going to think that the latest console super game is like the high fidelity thing, and maybe having a handheld version of that is their version of convenience, and something that's like a simple social game that the Trip's making might not even appeal to them at all. To them, it might be one of those things that they wouldn't even consider. If you talk about somebody's my grandmother, who would never even consider the high-end games. To her, the Wii might be the epitome of the high fidelity kind of the game, and something as simple as solitaire on her computer might be the high convenience thing. So it's and so depending on what product it is that you make, it might the flip side of it is it helps you decide, okay, if I want to be either one of those ends of the spectrum, what's the marketplace that I have to play in to be that to the people in that marketplace. And it's going to vary by age. It's going to vary by demographic. It could vary by the size of a business or the kind of industry people are in. In Zach's case, it certainly is going to vary by geography too. Some others. Oh, got one here.
So So I was just going to ask you about sort of customization and personalization, and I guess you sort of answered the question, which is that convenience is not coming down to the lowest common denominator or a common this thing, but maybe the next stage is customization for different classes of customers. Is that part of your premise or thesis as well?
Yeah, well, it is certainly part of it that there are that the trade-off varies for different sectors or different kinds of people or different population groups. So part of the decision is who am I playing to, and if I'm going to play to that particular market, where do I have to be either one end or the other of that, and So, and if to one group of people, it might look very different than to a different group of people. Or, to talk about, Zach's version of increasingly customizing products, in his case, he's looking at it the other way and saying, if I'm going to play to this group of people, what do I have to build to, be the super convenient product or the super fidelity product for that group of people? Yes? Just yell.
How do you decide when you're actually designing a product or coming up with whether to target fidelity or to target convenience in your product? And then how do you decide, or are you actually bracketing your product with, here's on the high end, this is the fidelity I want to go to, and this is the convenience I want to go to, and you're actually kind of bracketing between fidelity and convenience?
I'll tell you, 9 times out of 10 or more, the competitive opening is going to be the product that is more convenient, that targets a new user group that didn't care about the traditional product. And you're going to find that the traditional suppliers are overly focused on keeping up with feature creep demands from their high-end customers. That's almost always going to be the case.
And that's sort of classic innovator's dilemma,
yeah.
Right? Yeah.
I have a question to the three. Ship with your friend, and when you throw 20, you get a better ship. Now we're seeing a second generation where you can actually farm those ships, and if you get 20 neighbors as a fellow farmers, you get a better ship. So, do you see third generation coming, and if so, what that's going to be?
Yeah, it's evolving very rapidly, and even within the industry, there's a lot of discussion about using numbers to define these different generations. So I think the guys that started on Facebook specifically and made what are now known as the hamster games, where sometimes we'll call them the spreadsheet games, where you're just sort of treating the customer like a rat on a treadmill, and they're just repeating the same thing, and everybody just thinks it's kind of silly. All those companies are trying to figure out how to make it more like a real game. Have deeper, richer gameplay, deeper, richer graphics. So they're obviously moving up the fidelity curve, but they're focused on staying on Facebook because the platform is such a convenient platform. So I think that's a trend line. I think for say a more traditional company, if you're coming from a platform that already had more capability and you're already good at making more serious games, you've got to adapt to a platform like Facebook by trying to figure out how to make your products more convenient and easier for more people to play. I think one of the big measures for us, we try to think of themes that we consider to be really ubiquitous, because if I can get you interested in playing and you like it, I want you to want to tell your friends about it. Like we have this game called Crazy Penguin Catapult. I mean, just the name alone makes you want to tell your friend about it. And it was a number one app on some of the leading websites. It was it was the number one app last Christmas in the App Store with Apple. And basically, in the game, you're using a medieval catapult to launch penguins who are knocking out their arch rival polar bears in their lair. And people just thought it was hilarious. So if you've got something that has that kind of ubiquity where, yeah, this is it's funny and anybody can relate to this, and you also know that your friends can handle it, then you're going to tell more friends about it. And if the product is actually designed where you're involving your friends in the game and you're sharing and competing and doing things in a social context, that's the kind of new way of thinking about gaming that's becoming a much bigger deal. And you have to let go of the fidelity. You have to reduce the number of features, because if you don't do that, you're going to alienate way too many people. And even the gamer will look and go, yeah, I'm not going to tell very many of my friends about this because I know they can't handle it, and then they'll blame me. So I'll lose social value if I tell them about this. It's really got to be things that you believe your friends can handle.
Something else for you to add to some of your
Oh,
products?
I was absolutely thinking about that. For the AR clerk, once they get that receivable, they can launch a penguin.
They can
or
launch a
something.
penguin.
It would make it much more entertaining.
Speaking
Okay,
of fidelity
I'm David
versus
Brutman
convenience.
from SAP. And hearing your conversation, the one thing came to my mind, which is cost, the actual price point for consuming the experiences you were mentioning. And I was curious to hear your opinion. Do you see cost, the actual price point, as part of the convenience factor? Or do you see that maybe as a third axis to the trade-off, especially among consumers that are highly sensitive to price?
Well, I'll answer it in terms of the book, but I'd love to hear your thoughts on that. So to me, cost is a factor in convenience, because if something costs less, it's naturally more convenient for more people to get. But it's also important to think that it's not the defining factor, because if you look at in the music space, to go back to that, iPod, iTunes has become the convenient star in listening to music. It's not necessarily the lowest cost. I mean, you could probably buy a cheaper MP3 player. You could probably buy songs somewhere for less than 99 cents a song. But the combination of the cost is reasonable, and the ease of doing it, and the ubiquity of it, and the fact that it's actually become something of a habit, because it is the MP3 player to buy if you have no idea what MP3 player to buy, makes it the convenience winner. So cost is a factor, but not the absolute driving factor in my view of things.
Yeah, I would just modify that slightly, because I think it is somewhat more of a third axis, only from the standpoint that we see regular examples of people spending a whole lot of money and over-consuming just because it's convenient to do so. Mm-hmm. Again, we see that behavior with games. So it's not always as logical as you might think in terms of the price-demand relationship.
Yeah, I think I would imagine reading the book that cost tends to be on the convenience side of the scale, but looking at the iTunes example that you used, where they're able to command a premium price, perhaps over free, basically. So definitely a premium price. There is, I think, consumers, while they may not consciously decide this, and certainly corporations, it is a conscious decision. There's a time factor involved in this, right. And it's much easier to go to iTunes and download something than go search the web and pick up a virus. And so all that time, I think that imbues value into that, and I think that the time saving is a cost saving, even though they pay more money for it. And that's similar, I think, in enterprise software. You can do things more efficiently, more quickly. You'll actually pay a little bit more for it than you might have if you got it cheaper and had to struggle through it. So I don't think it's necessarily always plays to the low end of the convenience scale.
I think we probably have time for just one more. Yeah, we're there. We're about looking at Karen. What's that? Yeah, okay.
I have to admit I haven't read the book, so maybe you cover this in there. But
it's only been out for 2 weeks, so I'll forgive you this time.
I promise I will. I was wondering if you could talk at all about the hurdles or the issues around people adopting healthcare solutions, healthcare IT, or any of the issues around security, and I'm not sure if that fits in as a fidelity or a convenience factor, but personal comfort with providing their healthcare information.
I'm not sure I have a great answer. The only thing I can say or will say is that one of the things that strikes me, and I mentioned a little bit about this in the book, and, is that one of the things that's happened in the U.S. healthcare industry is that there is no convenient version of healthcare. It's all high fidelity. It's all high cost. It's all up there, and there tends to be, there seems to tend to be a natural tension in any industry that there's high fidelity players or there's high convenience players, or versions of those two products. In healthcare, there isn't. No, yeah, but that's just healthcare information. I mean, that's not actually getting care. And there's some of these efforts have come up about doing things like putting little clinics in Walmart or Walgreens and places like that, and they're having a hard time taking hold because there's such an artificial sort of way that that everybody gets paid for things, and if your insurance is not going to pay for you to go to a Walgreens clinic, so you're going to have to pay $60 to go or $100, but your insurance is going to pay for you to go to see your doctor, so you only pay a $20 copay. You're going to go see your doctor, even though it's a much more costly thing for society and all that. So it's a long way of saying that it's just in the model of the book, it's a mess, and there is nothing on this end, on this convenience end in healthcare to balance it out and give us those kinds of choices, and I don't know how we get there.
Is it because it's somewhat an artificial market? The government is
because it's such an artificial market, right?
Yeah, it's not a natural thing even today.
Right. Yeah, that would be the way I'd look at it. Anything else before we go? Great. Well, thank you all for coming. Thanks to Zach and Trip, and thanks to Karen for having us at Churchill Club.
Thank you. That was great.